Oh, the girl. You have been in the grave a long time, Master. Nice jugulars.
Heyo, Manga Kamen here.
I am here! Coming to the door like a hero!
This is a bit of a companion piece to another video I made earlier this month, and depending on how things go, this will be my Halloween special. So, The Batman. I talked about this show a few weeks ago, saying that it was underrated, and I still stand by that, obviously.
Be very careful with the next thing you say.
To save you some time, the show had some really good fight scenes, had different interpretations of the characters, especially when it comes to designs, and of course, a different narrative direction than the Batman animated series. This one focused on a younger Bruce Wayne as he developed as the Batman. It is not everyone's cup of tea, especially considering that it had a lot stacked against it, not including being a follow-up to the original animated series.
Gasp! Can it be?
Still, I enjoyed it, and you guys must have had a good time with it because at least 4K of you wanted me to talk about the direct home-to-movie that was made with this show, The Batman vs. Dracula.
There is only room for one Batman.
Originally aired in 2005, this made-for-home movie actually fulfilled a bit of a fantasy of mine when I was a little kid. You see, I grew up loving horror movie monsters. There was just something about them that caught my attention when I saw them on the silver screen. And of course, you had Dracula, the king of the vampires. To be frank, my first real exposure to Dracula was through the Castlevania games, and let me tell ya, the stuff of legends. Throw in the fact that I was a kid who grew up with watching stuff like Batman the Animated Series and Justice League, with Batman being a prominent character in my young life, it only made sense to my peanut-sized, sugar-rushed kid brain that the two characters should just duke it out. They're both Bat-themed, so why not?
Oh, that you remember.
It wouldn't be in 2005 that I'd finally get my wish. And let me tell ya, I was stoked. So today, for the Halloween special, let's take a little time and talk about this movie, what I think are its highlights, what I think are its low points, and some interesting tidbits here and there. I'm Manga Kamen, and let's begin, my friends. Also, obviously spoilers for the movie. Let's begin.
We take this as a monster movie, and at the end he becomes the monster that we're all scared of.
Before we get into the thick of things, we do need to address something that is a bit of a sore thumb, especially with this series. I'm sure if you've seen the character of Dracula, which, hey! You! Yes, you the artist with the draw tablet who put this video on as background noise as you draw. I need you to get their attention for at least a minute, so please look at the screen. Thank you. So, if you look at Batman's Dracula design, you'll probably notice something if you're familiar with Batman's antagonists. And that's because he looks an awful lot like Ra's al Ghul. Now, why is this? Well, back when Batman was being made, there was a bit of a big brain idea from the guys at WB and DC, and that would be that any character wouldn't be able to appear in a different form of media because the head honchos thought that it would confuse people.
You always were a loser.
Basically, take a character like Scarecrow, who showed up in the 2005 Batman Begins movie. That character wouldn't show up in the 2004 Batman cartoon.
But wait! There's more!
Or if you look towards stuff like the Justice League Unlimited cartoon, you'll notice there's a bit of a lack of Batman villains that show up in that. Or how Robin wasn't actually in the JLU cartoon despite being in the same continuity as the Batman animated series. Or to another extent, consider Robin in the Batman. One thing I didn't bring up in the video was that Robin wasn't introduced to the series until season 4, and that Batgirl was actually introduced before then. Well, also consider that Robin was part of the Teen Titans animated series. Would you look at that? The last episode for Teen Titans was aired on September 15th, 2006. And when did the Batman Season 4 opener, the episode where Robin was, actually aired? September 23rd, 2006.
It was just my time. It was just my time.
Coincidence? Probably, I don't know. Now, a lot of people online have mixed thoughts on the Bat embargo, such as how it seemed to be a bit of a dumb idea to include something like that since it implies that the audience can't see the difference between two versions of the same character.
It's a fictional product. It doesn't matter.
Well, of course, it all makes perfect sense.
Some people are dumb, but I would like to have some manner of hope in my soul that they aren't that dumb.
It's a simple fucking concept!
other people online consider to be a good thing since it allowed the creators to play around with the lesser known characters, both villains and heroes, and actively tell stories that the audience wouldn't be so familiar with. I can see both sides to this since I do like to think that the best creative works come from when you're under some kind of constraint, whether it be something like money, skill, or even basic bullshit rules like this.
It's weird the things you will win and the things you'll lose, and sometimes it makes no sense. We had an episode where Dipper gets a flyer from Wendy for a Halloween party, and it said on it like, Halloween party, bottles will be spun, no photos better wind up online, and they're like, bottles will be spun, spin the bottle reference. Impossible, never on the Disney Channel. I was like, all right. So I was like, okay, replace bottles will be spun with not S&P approved. I was just basically being a dick at that point, and they were like, our audience won't understand that reference. I'm like, yeah, but is it like against the rules? And they're like, not S&P approved, has been approved by S&P.
I can easily say that a character like the Clayface in the Batman cartoon came from this, especially since it did a great job with characterization and played around with Batman's lore at the same time. And of course, we come to the main course of this video, Dracula. So, enough dumb bureaucratic red tape, let's get this show started. What's this movie's story? It starts with the Penguin and Joker escaping from Arkham Asylum again, this time both of them on the hunt for a ton of money that another inmate had offered to split with them if they got him out of the joint.
Someone should take advantage of that.
They left his ass behind, by the way. Naturally, with two of Gotham's biggest and baddest criminals appearing back on the streets, the Batman is on the case and chases after them, focusing on the Joker. The Penguin, on the other hand, makes his way to the stashed loot, which just so happens to be buried in a tomb in Gotham's cemetery. Unfortunately, the Penguin wasn't able to get all the details of where the loot was stored specifically, so entering one tomb that he thinks that has it, he comes across the crypt of a special corpse. When trying to open the coffin, Penguin cuts his hand, and actual blood seeps into the dusty heart of the corpse, which awakens it. This is Dracula.
What's that?
And after feeding on an innocent security guard and turning Penguin into a Renfield-like character, Dracula begins his reign of darkness over Gotham, draining the blood from people and creating an army of vampire-like ghouls who do his bidding. Side note, if you're not familiar with Renfield, he's a character who appears in Bram Stoker's novel of Dracula. He was the devoted servant to the Count who would help Dracula perform his deeds when he was sleeping during the day, such as his plans to turn the female lead of the novel, Mina Harker, into a vampire. Cause when you're stuck working only at night, with the sun able to burn you to ashes, it pays to have a human companion who is also more versed with the modern day at your side. Eventually, the Batman learns about what's happening to the citizens, and has to not only use his detective skills, but his scientific abilities to deal with the disease of vampirism. There's also a bit of a side plot with another recurring Batman character, Vicki Vale. I'm sure most people are familiar with her since she did actually appear in the 1989 Batman film portrayed by Kim Basinger. I can never tell. In this, she's a television reporter who starts off a bit of a love interest for Bruce Wayne, but then becomes the target of interest of Dracula, who wants to use her soul to revive his long-dead bride, Camilla. No, not that one. I bring this up because it is kind of a criticism that I do have with this movie. Also, cards on the table, this is the only time that Vicki Vale shows up in this interpretation of the Batman. She's not a character in the actual series and is only mentioned and brought up in the movie. I guess she went through the same part that Detective Yin went through.
Oh, now what? I suppose you're gonna show me. Oh, gee, that's very nice. Oh, what is this? Some kind of magic act?
One thing to note is that the movie does go a bit harder with portrayals of violence, especially for a kid's show. Obviously, you have the Penguin cutting his hand and spilling blood over, but we do have scenes of Dracula attacking people, using his senses to see people's bloody veins, and of course...
No, Joker!
That's one good-looking corpse.
Breakfast in bed. Fresh squeezed.
Yeah, Joker becomes a vampire later on in the movie and steals plasma to fulfill his hunger.
bold finish of wild cherries with a hint of oak.
The movie does a good job having some of the more mature themes going on, with the animation adding to it as well. Then again, the Batman is known to have a lot more going on with its animation than the animated series did back in the day. There's a lot of playing around with the shadows, the coloring, and of course the camera work when showing various shots. Of course, there's the obvious question that people will ask when it comes to this story. Why the hell is Dracula in Gotham City and why is he buried there? Isn't he supposed to be in Transylvania? Well, as it turns out, the movie does explain this quite early. When Dracula was killed ages ago, his remains were transported to Gotham City. I guess when you're sick of the king of vampires munching on your townsfolk, you don't care where the bloodsucker just goes, you just want him out of your country. The movie, while I wouldn't call a straight up horror flick, does include elements that the scarier genre does hold. We're talking about a cartoon for kids, and that cartoon is based upon is still meant for a younger audience. I don't know why the creators of this cartoon thought to include Joker dancing in blood, but as someone who loves horror games and materials, I just love it. There's a lot of other things I do enjoy, especially the contrast between the Batman and Dracula, and how there's a comparison to be made between the two characters. To be frank, the original creators of Batman, Kane and Finger, never actually listed Dracula as an inspiration for the character. At least not from the amount of research I looked for. At most, the two had admiration for gothic style and tone of the Bram Stoker works. While I'm disappointed with that, that doesn't stop the creators from the film from making connections that play with the two characters.
You mean to tell me Budapest has a Dark Knight too?
Rare instances have been documented of a man who assumes the likeness of a bat in societies ancient as well as modern. And I believe that while instilling fear by night, these beings cloak themselves as normal members of society.
Fascinating theory.
Bats are fascinating creatures.
When you get down to it, yeah, the two have a lot in common. Aside from the obvious bat motifs that they hold, both of them are creatures of the night that instill fear into people, all the while putting on a public face that hides their true nature. Even their designs, when the Batman and Dracula meet for the first time on the rooftops of Gotham, they both have their flowing capes that cover their entire bodies, the only difference being that Dracula's is red and Batman's is blue. It's simple, but it does a good job of contrasting the two characters, and while Dracula's fear is for anyone of the night, Batman obviously hunts only those who seek to do harm to others. Of course, if you know anything about this series of Batman, one of the long-running themes is that the people of Gotham don't know if they can actually trust the Batman yet.
Man tries to protect Gotham. The more Gotham fears him. As if he were the son of Dracula.
I also have to give a lot of props for the voice acting for the movie as well. Most of the original cast who are from the show obviously reprised their roles here. You got Tom Kenny as the Penguin, Rino Romano as the Batman and Bruce Wayne, and Kevin Michael Richardson as the Joker. Vicky Vale? Well, you got one of the most used voice actors back in the day, Tara Strong. I don't think I need to say who she voices, since she's probably one of the most recognizable voice actors out there, and that's all I'm gonna say about her with this video about that. But Dracula? You've got Peter Stormare. He's actually a Swedish actor who's been in a lot of television, movies, and video games. Probably one of the more well-known roles, at least with my audience, but to be him being in Until Dawn.
I want you to remember this. I want you to remember this as you play your game. Every single choice will affect your fate and the fate of those around you.
Yeah, apparently he's that guy. I will say, him as Dracula, he really knows how to pull it off and makes this version of Dracula one of my favorites. A major highlight I loved about this movie was that the Batman was actually at a disadvantage against Dracula most of the time. That was a bit of consistency from the earlier seasons of the Batman cartoon, where Batman wouldn't have all the answers at the beginning of the fight and would have to adapt to fight his villains. But in this movie, Batman is never able to actually physically overpower Dracula. Batman does have garlic-filled smoke bombs, coat his batarangs with garlic, and they do act as a deterrent to Dracula, but the Vampire King is easily able to circumvent that. Even later in the film, when Batman creates a cure for the vampirism that Dracula spreads, it doesn't work on Dracula. Which, by the by, it's Alfred who comes up with, coating the garlic on Batman's weapons and actually getting the drop on Dracula to shoot him with the cure.
Bite this!
Damn, it looks like the nanomachines didn't work this time, Alfred. Listen, if I can make an Armstrong reference in a Batman video, you sure as hell know I'm gonna do it. Alfred has a lot more presence in this video. It really feels like a tooth and nail fight, with Batman being on the ropes throughout. And it isn't his strength that beats Dracula, it's his intellect, and we get this killer scene because of it.
You are Bruce Wayne.
I'm the Batman, and you're dust.
Come on, that's gotta be one of the hardest moments that Batman has had, killing Dracula, and being badass about it. Now, obviously, I enjoy this movie, but as a reviewer and critic, I do have my own misgivings about it. And we're gonna go through a few of those, but I want to point out that these don't really dampen the film, at least to me, and that'll be dependent on your guys' views going forward. So this section will be going over some of my critiques of the film. Probably the biggest issue I have is the side plot that movie is going with, and that's the romance plotline that's introduced early in the film, not only for Bruce Wayne, but also Dracula, which focuses on Vicky Vale, the only actual female character in this movie who has more than one line and is actually named. It's not like it's the worst thing in the world, especially since it does go to show the constraint that Bruce's life as the Batman can have on his mental health, as well as him not being able to establish actual connections with people. And that's a theme that's explored in the main show, so from that regard I appreciate that, but the issue is that, as explained before, this is the only time that Vicky will show up in this continuity.
Oh, well, that's convenient.
On the other hand, while Dracula is shown to have some interest in Vicky, sure, you can say it's pretty creepy on how he menaces on her, but it's Dracula, and considering that we have Strahd von Zarovich from D&D whose main goal is him getting a bride, this sort of behavior from vampires is to be expected.
You were right! Jump up your own ass and die!
Plus, he's the bad guy. We're not exactly supposed to be rooting for the guy, and he's supposed to be a creep.
I prefer my meat cooked.
My complaint is that we suddenly get a hard turn into Dracula trying to revive his dead lover, Camilla, using Vicky Vale as a sacrifice to do so. Now, for those who aren't familiar with this isn't really conducive to the original Dracula origins, but considering that this takes place in Gotham, that's not a big issue. It's more or less just coming out of nowhere. It felt like a punch to the jaw.
You must be the Belmont.
That leads into the second issue, and that's the cast. Not that the cast is bad, mind you, but the fact that most of the cast from the actual show isn't here. No Detective Yin, for example, and considering that the police are actually involved in this movie, even to the point where they're actively trying to capture the Batman since he's accused of kidnapping people in the movie, whereas Dracula is the one who's doing it. It leaves out a good idea for characterization for Detective Yin and Batman, playing on the themes of trust that were established in the main show. Maybe they wanted to not have the cast be so bogged down or have Detective Yin become a damsel in distress throughout this story, because that's what Vicky Vale becomes.
It's Hollywood, baby.
But her exclusion of the plot is just as jarring here as it was in the main cartoon.
Oh, she's gotta go.
The only other scene I have an issue with is the party scene where Dracula shows up. Now, to be clear, I enjoy the scene as you have Dr. Alucard trying to learn what he can about Bruce Wayne before hypnotizing him to have the billionaire walk outside of his own party where he could be an easy prey for Dracula. That's unsettling and honestly thought that was good dialogue and even sets up how Dracula will actually get defeated at the end of the movie. No, the issue with this scene is that it's too blunt, with showing that Dr. Alucard is actually Dracula. We've got him slurping up beefsteak tartare, him reeling away from garlic shrimp, announcing that he's from Eastern Europe, talking about a man with the visage of a bat, and him complaining about the sun when Bruce Wayne shows off his machine.
Such classic dialogue! What deadpan delivery!
I understand that this is aimed at a younger audience, but a lot of the not-so-subtle hinting takes a lot of the wind out of the sails. I believe that the scene could have had a lot more tension and would have had more punch if the following was involved. Number 1. Bruce and Alfred are discussing the party, and that they know some researchers that are coming in from Eastern Europe. Hell, make one of the earlier victims of Dracula's feast be one of the researchers, and Dracula just so happens to take the invitation from him. Do not show Dracula's more human-like form before the party. Before this part, we had mostly seen the more ghoulish form of Dracula. You can just keep his human form secret up until this point. And finally, cut back on the hints down Alucard that he's Dracula. You can include the studying of anthropology, the sunlight generator, and possibly even the garlic shrimp so we know you can still have hints on how the Vampire King would be fought against. That way, when Bruce writes down Alucard's name backwards and it comes to the conclusion that he's talking to Dracula, it has a lot more impact because it's something that we, the audience, could infer at the main character too. I want to make it clear that these issues do irk me as a critic. They don't fully detract from the actual main course that we have in the animated format, but I have to be honest here. Despite my misgivings with the film, I don't want you guys to feel detracted from it. From what I've seen with this movie, it seems to be a bit of a love letter to both Dracula and Batman, something that I myself have always wanted as a fan of both series of work, and seeing the two worlds collide is actually fascinating. Is the film perfect? No, but it has a lot of stuff going on with it that is good, and considering that it's set in a series of Batman that has been sadly overlooked in the past, this only makes it all the sweeter. I think the best part of this film is that you don't really need to know anything about the actual Batman 2004 series to watch it. It's a mostly self-contained story with the art design, characters, and voice actors from the same series, but it's self-contained. But it has its own thing going on. Sure, the obvious redesigns of the characters might be a bit jarring of an experience, especially for the Joker, as I saw a lot of people say to me they didn't really care for the design, but I think that if you're willing to give the film a chance, you'll enjoy it. It's not gonna break new ground, but I've always been of the mindset that you don't need to break the mold to make something great. Something traditional that does really good work on it is just as great as doing something new. Yeah, something new is great, but this kind of film has all that classic superhero attributes to it, pitting one of history's greatest superheroes against one of the silver screen's greatest monsters. What's not to like? I did give a lot away with this video, but I like to think that I've also left a fair bit out for you guys to enjoy it. To me, the Batman vs. Dracula was one of my favorite Batman films as a kid, and if you ask me, it should be a good watch for the spooky season. So if you can find it, go for it. I'm Manga Common, thanks for watching, and have a happy Halloween. Later!